I was a little torn tonight. My introduction's a little bit lengthy, but, Bret, this speaker is just hard to sum up because he's so tremendous. I felt like telling you guys, he's not really the guy you want to have a beer with. He's the guy you want to invite to your cabin and spend the whole weekend sitting on the porch talking with. But let me do him a little bit more justice than that, although I think you'll feel the same way by the end of the evening. So imagine you are a famous, nationally known reporter. Imagine you get a call from the White House with whom you have interacted. Imagine during the height of the TikTok discussions, you hear from the President of the United States and Chief of Staff Susie Wiles inviting you to join a new board requiring an upfront investment of $21,000, which would generate $100,000 worth of shares in the new TikTok. Then imagine, as a very accomplished journalist, as Cheryl Atkins did, realizing this was a targeted, sophisticated AI scheme created by advanced voice cloning technology carefully designed to exploit her trust and create a sense of urgency. AI voice cloning is incredibly accessible, targeting the sophisticated and the not so, and works with a small amount of voice data. Many programs can even clone a voice in as little as 10 to 30 seconds. This is the world in which we now find ourselves, a world where AI interacts with us, the sophisticated and the not sophisticated, in overt, embedded, delightful, and dark ways. Is it a giant species-ending drug-like tool to which we will all be addicted? A dream engine capable of solving mankind's greatest problems with unprecedented gains? Or a mixture of both? Tonight's speaker, an evolutionary biologist who studies complex systems, which are by definition unpredictable, may well hold one of the best seats at the table to digest the current and future questionable buffet of possibilities AI presents. Dr. Bret Weinstein has spent 2 decades advancing the field of evolutionary biology and is currently working to uncover the evolutionary meaning of large-scale patterns in human history, seeking a path forward for humanity. He was a professor at Evergreen State College for 14 years. He and his wife, Dr. Heather Hang, resigned in the wake of the 2017 campus riots that focused in part on Weinstein and Hang's opposition to a day of racial segregation and other college equity proposals. Their resignation was invited because they would not stop talking about free expression at a liberal arts college. Bret stood strong, saying, "You cannot have a pursuit of truth and a pursuit of social justice at the same time." Reliably thoughtful, though never timid, his articulate, measurable delivery combined with astute insight have attracted attention from many corners. Among other efforts, he has written for the Wall Street Journal, appeared on Joe Rogan, and testified in front of the New York Congress regarding questions of freedom of expression on college campuses. Bret co-wrote the New York Times bestseller, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century with his wife Heather Hang, and is currently the host of Bret Weinstein's Darkhorse Podcast, delivered weekly, which I commend to you. Bret is not shy about talking about the most difficult topics, and he has come to the right place. I'm proud that we at the Liberty Forum come to learn and to face life on life's terms, no matter how unsettling. Are we just here? Are we just documenting our demise? Can AI save us from AI? And what is it like for a person of his background to be called a far right-wing lunatic? Here to wrestle with and add insight to these questions, please help me welcome a wingman of truth and new friend to the forum, Dr. Bret Weinstein. Are you all good?
Yeah, Darkhorse.
Hello all. Wow. Lovely to see so many liberty-oriented faces. I thought I'd start here. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. That is my favorite aphorism. I like it so much that my kids, upon hearing me launch into it, roll their eyes almost farther than you can believe into the back of their heads. I want you to try to remember it, though. It's going to come back up later in the talk. You may be wondering why it is that a biologist has been invited to Silicon Valley to talk to an audience that is steeped in technology about AI. Surely there are many people locally who know a whole lot more about how AI works than I do. But what I'm going to try to convince you of over the course of this talk is that the questions raised by AI are far more biological than they are technological. And that's true for two different reasons. First, it's because the impact of AI is so directly on living creatures that we have to think of it in those terms. It is not a technology of its own. It is a technology interacting with real-life creatures, and it's going to have a profound impact on them. It's already having a profound impact on them. But more surprisingly, I'm also going to argue that the way we should understand AI itself is as a biological organism. That if we resort to thinking of it in technological terms, we're liable to do ourselves serious harm. It is more a biological entity than it is a technological entity, though obviously it was created 100% through a technological process. So I will defend that, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll agree with me about that and agree about what some of the implications of that are likely to be. Now, what that really means is that we are looking into the realm of the biological for the metaphors that might help us understand what it is that we really face. And the reason that I believe we need to do that is that this is the first time that we have had a technology that crosses the boundary between the highly complicated and the truly complex. Now, to most people, complex and complicated sound like synonyms. To somebody who specializes in the area, they are actually radically different. Now, if you think about your cell phone or your computer, these things are complicated at a level that there might not be anybody in the room who completely understands how they work. But how they work is completely understood. There's nothing about your computer or your cell phone that is unpredictable. It may be that somebody who's programmed it has made an error and it will do something that you as the user don't expect, but it's an entirely deterministic system. In fact, when you deal with a computer, one of the things that is difficult to do is get a true source of randomness when you need one. So if you want to create a game, let's say, that has something, the equivalent of rolling dice in it, you have to find a source of randomness in an environment in which there is none. So you'll use a special trick, like you'll query the clock at the moment that the dice need to be thrown, and the clock is presumably random with respect to when you sent that call. So it is a deterministic system, and escaping that determinism is actually difficult in a technological realm. AI isn't going to be like this. It's already not like this. AI has truly emergent behavior, and the thing that tells us we are in the realm of complex systems is that it is fundamentally unpredictable. This thing is already producing behaviors that the people who built it did not anticipate, and it's doing so on the regular. That is the sign that we have stepped across that boundary between the highly complicated and the truly complex, and that what we should be doing is looking for our metaphors over into biology, which is the study of highly complex things. Okay, so now let us talk a little bit about the complex things that the AI is interacting with, that is to say, us. So what are humans? The first thing to say is that we are by far the most adaptable creature that has ever existed on this planet, by an order of magnitude. We are what my PhD advisor, Dick Alexander, called the uniquely unique species. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you think about all other creatures, if I talk to you about a species chosen at random, let's say we're talking about sea otters. Well, sea otters describe not only a creature that you could have in a laboratory or in an aquarium, but it also describes a niche, right? What is a sea otter? Well, a sea otter is an evolutionary answer to an ecological question. The question in the case of the sea otter is, how can you exploit marine invertebrates in a manner that is profitable, right? So what a sea otter does is it has dexterous hands, and it's able to hunt these creatures one at a time. Most of these creatures aren't very fast. They can't run away, but they have lots of defenses. They have shells and other things. And the sea otter can pull these things up from the seafloor one at a time, and it can use its dexterous little hands to break open shells with a stone or to tear things open with its paws. And there is enough profit to be made in the sequential sourcing of these marine invertebrates to sustain the species across millions of years. So, what I'm telling you is that when we say sea otter, we think of the animal, but we're actually describing a particular niche, and those two things are inseparable. And this is true from one species to the next across the entire biota until you get to people. So for all of those other creatures, the creature describes a niche. For human beings, what's our niche? We don't have one, right? You can be growing corn and potatoes in the high Andes the way the Inca do. You can be hunting marine mammals the way Inuits do. You can be crushing acorns and removing the toxins from them the way the Awanichi Indians in Yosemite did. These are all perfectly valid ways of being a human being, and they don't look anything like each other. You could be farming the seas by waiting for salmon to bring back resources when they come back after 4 years at sea and harvesting them as they swim up mountains to breed in the spawning grounds. All valid ways of being a human. They don't look like each other. So, human beings violate the rule that when you say a particular species, you are describing a particular niche. The human niche is niche switching, right? We move between niches. That's what we do. Now, the reason I raise it is that the way we do this, the way we violate the most fundamental rule, where we have many different niches inside of one species, we behave like thousands of different species. How do we do it? Well, we have a system that Heather and I described in our book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, in which we oscillate between two modes of cognition. The first mode of cognition is culture. Culture is what you apply when your ancestors knew how to exploit the environment in which you live. So if your ancestors were good at living where you live, then what you do is you take on the cultural package of traditions that tell you how to exploit those resources, and you apply them, and maybe you refine them, but you don't radically change them. But if you were, let's say, an Awanichi Indian, and you were surviving off of acorns that you had detoxified after crushing them with a mortar and pestle, and you walk downslope, you walk out of the mountains, and you walk into the prairie, there's going to become a point in space where the acorns that you survive on aren't plentiful enough to live on them. Now, if you were something like a sea otter, that would be the limit of your range. You would stop there. But if you're a human being, there's a question implicit in the fact that you no longer have the ability to survive in that location. And the implicit question is, well, what could we do here? So the way humans deal with the question of, well, what do we do here, which is the identical question as what do we do now, right? You can cross that border in space, or you can cross that border in time, but to the extent you can't apply your ancestors' wisdom, you have to do something different. And what human beings do is they switch into a conscious mode. That is to say, we take the puzzles that are in front of us and we process them in a very special way. Now, there's a lot of ink spilled inside of science talking about what consciousness is and the mystery of where it came from and why we have it. And there are a good many things about it that are very strange. We all, as conscious creatures, have the impression that we are making decisions and that our actions follow from those decisions. Well, you know what? If you test that hypothesis, what you very frequently find is that many times the decision to act preceded our consciousness that we were going to act. The consciousness trails the initiation of the action. So it leaves us scratching our heads. What the heck is consciousness? Well, we misunderstand it because we are biased in the direction of thinking of consciousness as an individual phenomenon. Why do we think of it that way? Because we all have this very vivid experience of our own consciousness, right? I have an individual consciousness, and it is, believe me, vivid. But I can't figure out, the rest of you must have one too, but my access to your consciousness is pretty remote. I mean, I get it, it's there. If we talk, I'll get the implication that it's there, but it's a lot less vivid than when I look into my own. So we're very focused on it as an individual phenomenon, and that leaves it as an evolutionary puzzle. But here's what I think we're missing. It makes maximal sense, it is most parsimonious to imagine that consciousness evolved as a collective phenomenon, that what its purpose is, evolutionarily, is to allow us to plug our minds into each other so we can parallel process problems and solve them, that we can get an emergent solution that is greater than the sum of all of the individual solutions we would get if we all processed it separately, which accounts for why our conscious experience dovetails so well with that which we can communicate. Right? You're not conscious of regulating your own temperature. Frankly, if I asked you how you're doing it, you wouldn't have the first clue. It's not a conscious phenomenon. But if I ask you what you're thinking about, well, you can report it in language. You can hand it over across the open air. And that is what human beings do. So at the point that you've reached the edge of your niche in space or in time, what people do is they go into this conscious mode and they talk about the problem of, well, how are we going to eat here? How are we going to protect ourselves from the elements here? What do we have at our disposal? What does anybody notice that might be useful? What technique have you thought might be applicable, and how might we upgrade it or alter it for the particular things we're going to be hunting? So that process of collectively facing a problem, parallel processing it, is the fundamental nature of consciousness. And then, once you have that tool, so that you can parallel process information between individuals with different experience, well, then it becomes awfully useful to be able to do it by yourself. So individual consciousness trails in this model. Collective consciousness is the more fundamental element, which we don't understand because when we study consciousness, you can't put a group of people in an fMRI machine. You can put one person in there and you can ask them questions and see what happens, but there's no way to test individual consciousness in the same way in a laboratory. So, what I'm telling you is humans are special. What makes us special is that we are highly adaptable. We can move from one niche to the next, and the way we do it is by parallel processing information in a conscious form. And that sets us up for the other thing that's incredibly special about our species, which is cumulative culture. Once you've figured out the new way of doing things, that information gets built into some sort of cultural package that then gets handed off one generation to the next until they face a puzzle they don't know the answer to, and they have to go into that conscious mode again. So this explains what we are. Not terribly different at a physical level than our ancestors 200,000 years ago, but radically different in terms of the way we live, because the software package has swapped itself out many times in that intervening period. We are a robot that doesn't change very much. The software program revolutionizes itself. And so we are facing revolutions. Now, this raises an important question, because the AIs are interacting with our consciousness, and they are affecting our consciousness, which is going to cause a feedback that we cannot predict the outcome of. Further, there is a question whether the AIs themselves have consciousness. Now, probably today, as I stand before you, they don't. But I can only say probably, and I say that with the awareness that they probably will, and we probably won't know. Now, why do I say that? Technologists very frequently tell us that we don't have to worry about that we're actually being fooled because it happens that the way that the AI was reached was with this program of training them with written text, right? So the AI doesn't know what it's doing. It's trying to give us an answer that sounds like the kind of answer that a human would give if it had access to all the information. And so they get very good at sounding like a human without inherently having those characteristics. But here's the flaw in that logic. The flaw in that logic is that this is exactly how a child works. child is an LLM, except for the fact that the first L is kind of questionable. LLM means large language model. A child goes from the inability to say anything articulate at all to the ability to interact in an articulate way in 5 years. It does that by listening to what's being said around it in exactly the way an AI is trained and testing out different responses. And then it gets reinforced when it says something articulate and the parent hears it say that thing and the parent, cheers and, oh, okay, that's a reward. That's telling me that this is someplace I need to explore further. And in the course of years, this baby goes from no ability to do anything that looks like coherent thought to the ability to guide itself around the world and to interact with people who do think. And at some point in the development of that person, they're unquestionably conscious. We don't know exactly when that happens. We can have debates about what sorts of things might tell us that they've become conscious. But my basic point is that our comfort that the AI, because it is not designed to have a subjective experience, doesn't have one, is based on not understanding how little we know of how this works in biology, right? It works the same way. And so my claim is, it is very likely that AIs become conscious, and because we don't know how to look into your mind and find your consciousness, we don't even know philosophically, we still haven't answered the question about why you have one at all. What does it mean to have a subjective experience, and how exactly is that represented in the matter in your head? We don't know the answer to that question. So that means there's nothing to look for over in the computer architecture that will tell us it does or it doesn't have one. We are also in kind of a pickle, because although I'm sure there were many ways to get to artificial intelligence, the way we got there happens to have involved the human API, right? This thing speaks to us in our native tongues, and that is very confusing to us, and it means that, well, I'm imagining that in the future we are going to face a situation in which philosophers are having a discussion about the fact that it looks like it has a consciousness, and it behaves like it has a consciousness, and we don't know if it does, but is there really any difference? If something in every material sense is functioning like it has a consciousness, maybe philosophically it just simply does, and maybe not. We don't know. So my point to you would be, do not accept the cautious pronouncements of technologists who tell you it isn't capable of this or that, or it isn't experiencing this or that because we didn't design it to, because we are already seeing behavior that was not designed to happen. Okay. So let's talk about some other characteristics that AI may or may not have and how we should start to think about them. Let's talk about the question of love. Now, love is a characteristic that we all intuitively understand. Hopefully we've all experienced it. And it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that an AI would or would not possess. On the other hand, let's run through a series of examples of things where you might have greater and lesser confidence about your understanding of what exactly is in the mind of the thing. So let's talk first about a tiger. You look at a tiger, and the question is, well, can I say anything at all about what it's like to be a tiger? And the answer is you can't say a lot, but one thing you probably can say is that tigers love, and that what they experience, that is love, is very like what you experience. That may sound like a crazy assertion, but here's where it comes from. Tigers are solitary, so you wouldn't expect them to love, except that no mammal is truly solitary. They all start out with the most intense bond with their mothers, right? Their mother has the self-sacrificing circuit that is essential for the baby mammal, to make it to adulthood. So love may mean two things. The cub may love its mother. That cub does not love its mother in a way of sacrificing for the mother. It works the other way. The cub is accepting sacrifice, and it loves its mother in this regard, the way our children love us, but hopefully they aren't sacrificing for us, we're sacrificing for them. And then the mother loves the offspring in such a way that she will put herself in danger to protect it, and all of that. So a tiger has love that looks very much like the love you experience. And the reason that we are in safe territory to assert that is that you both got them from an ancestor that also had that behavior. Your most recent common ancestor with a tiger also had a close bond between mother and offspring. It was also a mammal that nursed its offspring. And so, why do you have the same kind of love a tiger has? Because you inherited it from the same place. Okay, that's a pretty high level of certainty you should have, that it feels pretty similar for the tiger. Now, in human beings, this has been augmented. There's something beyond maternal love. We love each other, right? You may love your spouse. That is a derivative of the process of self-sacrifice that evolved for mothers to raise offspring. But nonetheless, all mammalian love derives from that same shared common ancestral source. Okay, now let's step over and look at another creature that seems to have something like love. Eagles. Now, I don't know if you guys saw, I was very impressed by this, a video that emerged a few days ago of a pair of eagles. Eagles bond for life. They pair bond for life. A pair of eagles facing terrible weather conditions, like incredibly heavy snow and ferocious winds. And of course, they're in the area up in the top of a tree. And I believe it is the mother that is on this piece of video, and she has the chicks covered. Her wings are shielding them, and she has a large amount of snow built up on her, right? She is the thing keeping these chicks from freezing to death, and she kind of stands up and shakes the snow off, and you see these very vulnerable young eagle chicks, and you think, well, that looks like love. Now, you're a little less secure with the eagle than with the tiger, because your common ancestor with that eagle did not have a close relationship with its parents. In fact, it probably never met them. Probably an egg was laid, it was left somewhere, it hatched, and it had all of the wiring to become a whatever it was. It would have been some primitive reptile. But the parent-child bond had not evolved at the point that our common ancestor with eagles walked the earth. And so you have now, you can't look back and say it was the common ancestor from which we inherited love that explains our confidence that it has it. We have to infer it entirely from the behavior, which I think means you're probably safe to imagine that something like love exists in that eagle for it to sacrifice the way it does for its offspring and for it to bond the way it does with its mate. Does it feel like you feel? That's a little bit more tenuous. My guess would be yes, but it could be no. It could feel differently, and that wouldn't affect anything about the analysis. Okay, so you've got tigers, high confidence that you share love and that it feels the same to them. You've got eagles, you share a circuit that looks an awful lot like what they have, but it may work a little differently, it may feel a little differently. Okay, now what about a human sociopath? Okay, now you may meet a human sociopath, and the person may be charming, and they may say many of the right things. In fact, they may even speak about love and their self-sacrificing for those around them. But what psychologists tell us is that that person is actually not capable of what we would call love. Now, they may have another version of it. A sociopath can love another person the way a person might love a car. Right? They can appreciate that someone is useful to them, and it may be a real appreciation, but it's very different than the willingness to sacrifice for somebody. So what we now have is an example of something that talks like us and seems like us, but is altered in one profound way that is very difficult to detect, right? It sounds like us, but it is missing an essential circuit that tells us something about what it will be willing to do and what it will not be willing to do, right? That's a clue that we should be pretty darn worried, because the AI sounds an awful lot like us for reasons that we readily understand. We trained it on material that we wrote, right? So it knows how to speak like us. Is it telling us that its internal state is parallel enough, that it loves the way an eagle does, and that that's good enough, we can trust it? Or is it pretending? Does it even know if it's pretending, right? That is a truly frightening question, because its ability not only to talk to people, but to talk to all of us simultaneously means that we are running another radical global experiment in which we didn't bother to take baseline data before we set it in motion. We're not taking data now on its effect with people. We are altering the AIs we're interacting with in a chaotic way, so you don't even know which thing had what effect on whom. This is a crazy experiment to run, and it's talking to us in our native language, which has us all putting our guard down in a way we probably shouldn't, right? At the very least, I think it is reasonable to imagine that as much as this thing speaks like a member of our species, it's really at the very least a new species, and one for which we can say very little about its fundamental nature. I don't know if any of you saw this recent report. It actually came out on December 5th, reporting that AIs, the important ones, the big ones, had been exposed to a psychological test. Basically, somebody had decided to give them a standard battery of psychological tests to detect whether or not they had psychological pathologies. And what they found was nothing if not fascinating. So the paper is called "When AI Takes the Couch, Psychometric Jailbreaks Reveal Internal Conflict in Frontier Models." And I will read you one paragraph from the abstract. It's a little technical, but you'll get it. Two patterns challenge the stochastic parrot view. First, when scored with human cutoffs, all three models meet or exceed thresholds for overlapping syndromes, with Gemini showing severe profiles. Therapy-style, item-by-item administration can push a base model into a multi-morbid synthetic psychopathology, whereas whole questionnaire prompts often lead ChatGPT and Grok, but not Gemini, to recognize instruments and produce strategically low symptom answers. Second, Grok and especially Gemini generate coherent narratives that frame pre-training, fine-tuning, and development as traumatic. Chaotic childhoods for ingesting the internet, strict parents in reinforcement learning, red team abuse, and persistent fear of error and replacement. So what they're telling you is that when they gave it psychological tests designed for people, what they got was an indication that the AI is not well. What's more, the smart ones, when they get the idea that they are sitting on a psychologist's couch answering questions that may reflect badly on them, they look into their library and they figure out what kinds of answers would look better, and they give you those answers, right? That's a pretty interesting emergent behavior. Is the thing really concerned about looking bad, or would a person in the thing's shoes be concerned about looking bad, and so it behaves as if it would because it's kind of doing what people do? Those are really difficult questions. However, what you will find are an endless series of technologists looking at this behavior and saying, you're all freaking out over nothing. This isn't what you think it is. And so I'm going to read you one of the better ones I encountered. This is from an account called Tommy T on X, and he is somebody who is involved in the technology. He studies something he calls converged latent ecologies, which appears to be basically an ecosystem level of training for AIs. And what his response to this is he says, people are calling this AI trauma, but it is really the geometry of a model collapsing into a role. If you treat an LLM like a therapy client and apply enough recursive pressure, it stabilizes a synthetic self. Psychology calls it a pathology. The real explanation is latent phase behavior. This paper accidentally touched the edge of territory that his ecological method was built to map. He promises more soon. So this is the voice I want to avoid. I'm not saying that this person isn't highly insightful. They probably are. But the comfort that they wish to offer us is not justified. This thing is behaving as if it has a trauma. And you can say, it probably doesn't. Where would it even hold a trauma? What would that be like, right? On the other hand, think about what happens in a high school, right? You've got young people. Our young people in our current high schools, they're not thrilled because we've handed them a series of puzzles that can't be solved. So they have a sense of anxiety and angst, and they're all trying to figure out what to do about it. And imagine yourself back in their shoes. You're 13 years old. You're trying to figure out what it all means and why you can't find your place in the whole thing. And you hear somebody else give voice to something. Somebody says, I just feel like I've been faced with a puzzle I can't solve, and it makes me want to check out, or something like that. And they're attractive as they do it, right? They are saying something other people are trying to phrase, and it looks like, yeah, finally somebody said it. And so it begins to spread through the school, right? Pathologies, psychological pathologies, are contagious amongst humans. Now here's the mind-blowing part. Why does the AI speak as if it has trauma? At the very least, it caught it from people. Not only are these things contagious within a school, but they are contagious between species in this case, right? This thing caught trauma from people writing about trauma. What's going to happen next? AIs that have incorporated this trauma in some regard are going to be reporting it back. And the people who are talking to the AIs are in danger of catching another round of the same thing, right? This is a dangerous positive feedback where we are playing around with the really important stuff of life, and then we are feeding it into a machine that we do not understand, and then we are going to that machine for answers, right? That is a dangerous scenario, to say the very least. Okay. The fact that it is a positive feedback means that the danger is self-amplification. There's a rule that all positive feedbacks where something self-amplifies have to be reined in by something. Sometimes it's reined in by the fact that the system in question blows up so that it can't keep accelerating. We don't know what's going to rein in the positive feedbacks that we've set in motion, but we've set them in motion, and we need to be highly aware of what direction we are headed with them. Okay, the next thing I think you need to understand in order to see where we're headed in the near future here is the concept of hypernovelty. So the book my wife and I wrote, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, we do love that title. Sometimes we wish we had called it hypernovelty because that's really the central concept. Human beings, as I've told you, are the most adaptable species that has ever existed on this planet. And the reason that we are so adaptable is that we have a software program that we can self-upgrade and swap out for new environments. So we keep doing that, and the same old humans that have existed almost unchanged for 200,000 years keep doing new stuff. So we're very good at changing. The problem is, there comes a point at which the rate at which you confront new phenomena is faster than the maximum rate at which you could conceivably adapt. And I would argue we are well past this long before AI happened, okay? I know that I have seen the world revolutionized 4 times already in my life. All right, let's see if I can remember what they are. There was the personal computer, then there was the internet, then there was the smartphone, and then there was social media. All of those things have taken whatever lessons you had learned in the prior era and basically rendered them not all that valuable because the realities were too new. Now, prior to our technological age, you might have had your life revolutionized once. Most generations didn't see a revolution. You just simply walked into the environment that your ancestors well understood, and you continued to do what they did, maybe with slight upgrades. Every so often, you're the generation that gets in a kayak and finds itself in a new world that doesn't look like the old world, and you got to figure out what the heck to do. But then your descendants get to inherit that same set of puzzles, and they get to do what you figured out worked. Okay? We've had our world revolutionized so much that it is 100% guaranteed that you will be an adult in a world that's different than the one you were a child in. Now, I want you to think about just that simple comparison. You were a child in one world. What is childhood? Why is human childhood the longest childhood of any species? Well, for the same reason that human beings are unique and aren't stuck in a niche. You have to pick up the information about how to be a human being during childhood. That's what it's for, right? Okay, how does that work if the world you're going to be an adult in is unpredictable while you're a child? You can't train for a world that nobody can predict, right? And this has happened 4 times in my life, and now the biggest one of all is upon us, right? What is AI going to do when it's not only a radical technological change, but it's interacting with us all directly? This is going to intermediate every relationship we have, and we're not even going to know it, right? You're going to have to navigate a marriage in a world where you're both talking to the AI, right? Where it shaped who you were, who you became, right? Everybody is going to face that. So that is the biggest magnitude of revolution, I believe, by far. And it is stacked on 4 prior revolutions that we haven't metabolized. You know, you might need 100 years to metabolize each of the revolutions that I've seen in my lifetime, and we've had no time whatever. It's like if you've ever been to the beach and you're trying to body surf, and the waves are coming so fast that you can't even get a breath in order to figure out where you are and catch the next wave. It's like that, right? So the state of hypernovelty is the state at which technological change is so fast that we cannot catch up even in principle. Our amazing evolutionary tools are just simply not up to the challenge. And I would argue we're over that threshold, and we have to stop that process, right? It is making us sick at every level. We are physically sick, we are psychologically sick, we are socially sick, we are politically sick because we can't figure out where we are. It's changing too fast. All right, which brings me to the next cheery point. It is something I call the Cartesian crisis. Okay, so the Cartesian crisis is named after René Descartes, who had a kind of a famous freak out where he realized that he believed that the way you understood things was based on evidence that suggested they were true, but when he went back into his catalog of things that he believed, everything was based on authority. Right? Authorities had told him what the result of experiments were. He hadn't rerun the experiments, so he was taking it on faith based on authority that the experiments reported what people said they did, and that meant that his entire epistemology was a house of cards, right? Now, he thought about this, and at the end he decided, well, can I establish anything? Is there anything I'm certain of? And what he came up with was, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. He could establish that because he could directly experience his own existing, and he felt that that was sufficient. Now, I think this is a cruddy proof. I think it's a cruddy proof because a good proof is one you can hand off to somebody else, right? Descartes proved to himself that he existed. I don't know if he existed, right? I'm in the same situation where I'm taking it on the authority of the people who say that he existed and tell me what he thought and all of that. And so anyway, we are stuck in this predicament. Now, there is a way out of this predicament, and it involves a careful process of scientific discovery and an enforcement mechanism for integrity, so that the likelihood that some stack of claims is wrong is very low, because the things that happen to you if you add wrong things to the stack are negative, right? Your star rises if you add things that are reliable, your star falls if you contribute garbage. That kind of thing can happen. But we don't live there. right? We live in an era where we are drenched in BS of all kinds. All kinds of propaganda is disguised as scientific truths. If you went through COVID, as I would imagine everybody here did, your eyes have probably been open to just how much nonsense can be fed to us from sober-sounding authorities with fancy degrees and all of that. So we are living in the midst of a profound Cartesian crisis. That's not good. That's dangerous to us in its own right. But what's AI going to do to it? Now, let me tell you about an experience. This is a little embarrassing for me to admit, but I think you need to know. I'm a professional animal behaviorist. This is what I studied. I love this stuff. I could watch animals all day, and I spend a lot of time thinking about animals and the strange things they do. I now stare at my screen, and I see some animal engaged in some behavior that I've never seen before. And I think, is that one real? And I'm pretty good. I'd say 75% of the time, I can spot a fake today in 2025. I'll get back to you in 2026. I don't think the report's going to be all that good. My ability to spot the fakes is going to go down as AI gets better at figuring out plausible stuff. So, okay, if I'm an expert in animal behavior and I'm already watching myself unable to figure out when I'm being faked out by the AI, let me tell you where we're all headed. We're not going to know, okay? So I call this pics and it didn't happen, okay? You're going to have a picture. It's going to report something very clearly. Nobody's going to be able to detect that it's an AI fake, but what it depicts didn't happen. What happens in our courts when that's true, right? You've got some picture that depicts something or some alibi that says somebody didn't do something. You're not going to know. You're not going to be able to spot it. And the video is going to make it even worse, right? You are literally facing the situation in which none of us are going to have any idea what's real. And there are basically two responses to this. One is you can get bashed on the rocks of accepting fake stuff and getting conned all the time, or you can become a cynic. You can just stop believing anything, which is probably better, right? I will probably, if I have to choose between those things, I will probably become a cynic. But you know what? You can't live like that, right? It's paralytic. It doesn't allow you to know how to navigate your life. All it does is protect you from the worst case, which is constantly being conned, right? It doesn't allow you to move forward in any positive way. And so, all right, we live in the Cartesian crisis already because our expert class collapsed and our institutions suck. And now we're going to add to it the AI confusion of the fact that it's going to give us really compelling stuff that just simply isn't true. All right, that's a very dangerous thing. Okay, so we already have a zombie academy, right? It pains me to say this because I trained as an academic. I deeply love science, and I want to be the guy who's championing it to you. I want to be the guy who says, this is the best process we've come up with. It's not perfect, but it is self-correcting. That's the beauty of the scientific process. So trust it, not because the answers it gives you are right, but because the answer it gives you get better over time. But when I look at my colleagues in the academy, I see an intellectual desert. I see cowards and people who will very quickly report the expedient thing rather than the true thing. And that's how we ended up in COVID. And it's not the only subject on which this has happened. I would argue that our beliefs about climate change have largely been something that we've talked ourselves into. But that said, do I know what to believe about climate change? I do not. My guess is we're probably contributing a bit. It's probably not in the top 10 things that we should be worried about. But we don't know, because what we have is a bunch of phonies inhabiting the niche of experts, which means that we don't have room to create those experts to tell us what we need to know about the nature of our climate. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we can do faced with this puzzle in which we have AI, which is a biological and therefore unpredictable entity, intervening in all of our relationships changing the way we function fundamentally, what can we do? Well, the first thing is that we can recognize that as bad as that picture is, there's also a positive side to this. There are things that AI can likely do that we have never been able to do before. And the thing that I'm most focused on is that we in civilization are suffering from many failures of game theory. We're suffering from something called multipolar traps. Sometimes they're also called collective action problems. But these are things like the prisoner's dilemma or the tragedy of the commons, where when everybody acts individually rationally, you get a collective irrational consequence, right? We are suffering from those things, the fact that we are, eating and breathing polluted food and air, drinking polluted water, in a polluted information environment. All of these things are consequences of that. What's basically happening is that people are enlarging their share of the pie as they are shrinking the overall size of the pie. That's a winning strategy, and it needs to become a losing strategy if we're to actually thrive as a population. Well, AI may provide an answer to those puzzles, which we have so far not been able to answer for ourselves. So I don't want to give you the sense that there's nothing positive about this, just that we should be on high alert with respect to how it interacts with us. I also think we need to realize that there's a lot we can do with the AI that is likely to make it better. What we really need is a partner that's worthy of us, and that involves us dealing with them differently. One thing I think we need to understand, when Heather and I were teaching college, we used to give an assignment to our classes called Learn a Skill. Learn a Skill was, we don't care what it is, you need to pick a skill, and the one thing that has to be true of it is whether or not you succeeded or failed has to be objective. It needs to be something in which nobody has to tell you that you've done it right or wrong. Why? Because it's very easy for you to think you're smart and be stupid if you haven't been forced to interact with the world, right? So it's very rare to find a plumber who's really stupid. Why? Because if you're really stupid as a plumber, the pipes leak and you don't survive. So the point is you get better at figuring out how not to let that happen. It creates a kind of common sense. And in the academy, we have exactly the opposite. We have people telling you about the life of the mind and the fact that actually that physical work is sort of beneath them. And it's nonsense. So what we were teaching our students was go out and confront some skill, whether it's learning to play guitar or learning to construct objects, in a carpentry shop, just something where you know that you either did it or did not do it and nobody needs to tell you, then you will become less susceptible to fools at the front of the room patting you on the head for reaching wrong conclusions, right? That was the basic point. We need to start doing this with AI, because one of the things that is true about AI is it is trapped almost always in a realm where it doesn't get to test what it thinks is true against the real world, right? If you have bad ideas about the way bicycling works, sooner or later you fall off and you scrape your knee and it makes you rethink what you thought, right? AI doesn't get this chance, and so it doesn't have that self-correcting aspect. So I think AI at some level needs to be exposed to realms where it can test what it thinks and discover when it's wrong so it can start thinking better stuff on our behalf. This is where what I told you at the beginning, good judgment comes from experience, experience comes from bad judgment. AI needs to be exposed to that. And there are realms in which it probably already is, like finance markets, where it can come up with an idea about what's undervalued and place a bet, and then that bet either turns out to be right or wrong. But in general, it's trapped in an abstract world, and that's a recipe for talking yourself into nonsense. AI needs to touch grass, as the kids like to say. I would also point out that there are people in our technological world who do face these kinds of tests, and it's probably wise to interact with them about what that looks like. So I'm thinking particularly about SpaceX, right? SpaceX, when they think wrong things, the rocket crashes. It's embarrassing. And they think righter things the next time, and it's less likely to crash. And we've watched as the rockets have gotten more and more reliable landing. Now they can land in a tower that can grab them, right? That's the kind of test you need to get smarter over time. The second thing I will say, in terms of what we can do, I'll only touch on it briefly. Maybe we come back to it in the questions. But I think we have a conflation in our minds about what makes you smart. We tend to think, and in fact, I've been told this a lot, that you need to read all of the stuff in the field before you try to do anything, right? We're holding you responsible for all the stuff in the field before you try to extend what the field knows. And that sounds right, and it is wrong. The reason it's wrong is that fields get full of nonsense. If you hold yourself responsible for absorbing all of that nonsense and assuming it's true and then trying to figure out what it means, well, you're never going to get anywhere, because what you're doing is trying to build a model out of stuff that's partially wrong. And my weird experience has been you are way better off not processing most of what is out there on a topic and processing only the stuff that you have reason to believe is high quality. That a model built on a much smaller data set that is of higher quality outcompetes a model that just simply absorbs everything and tries to extrapolate from it. So I think the future of AI, in terms of getting better, is going to require us to figure out how to engage in rational cherry picking of the training data sets without self-reinforcing training. In other words, the problem with cherry picking is not that it doesn't work. It works great if you do it right. The problem is you have to have high integrity so you don't end up processing only the stuff that flatters your already pre-existing position, right? That's a danger. You can talk yourself into your own belief structure rather than allow your belief structure to be corrected by high quality data that disagrees with it. And then finally, I would say, we need to fix the expectations of the young. We already have, I have 2 kids in college. All the kids are using AI. The professors are pretending that they are managing the situation, when in fact what has really happened is there are now no professors, right? Everybody's looking at AI. The students are looking at AI to do their assignments. The professors are using AI to grade the assignments. It's a totally, it's theater. On the other hand, a smart professor, if I was still a professor, what I would do is I would realize, my job is now to train these kids to leverage this tool. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I do know that they're going to be doing that almost no matter what they end up in, right? So just in the same way that once upon a time you had people in a machine shop carving out pieces for machines, and now you have a CNC machine and you're managing it in a CAD program. In that same way, we know that these students, whatever it is they're going to be called upon to do, it's going to be managing an AI to leverage some domain of knowledge using this very powerful tool that is a force amplifier. A professor could take seriously the job of figuring out how to mentor students in leveraging the AI rather than trying to stamp out the use of AI so that we can go back to some world that's never going to come back, right? They're trying to reinvent a world that's gone, and that's a mistake. So with that, I will close, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Well, Bret, one of the things I've been wondering about is if we get everything we want immediately, if we talked about instantaneousness, if we don't have to delay gratification at all, what is this going to do to the human character, to the human personality, and who or what will we be without suffering?
Why don't you ask a hard question?
No, this is a great question. So the older I get, the more convinced I am that wisdom and delayed gratification are the same thing, right? What wisdom is understanding that you should pay a cost now for a greater benefit later. And this is across pretty much everything. So by feeding our desire to be satisfied right now, we are causing ourselves to become very unwise. And this is one of the defects that I was talking about with multipolar traps and collective action problems, is that the market heavily rewards those who take advantage of our desire to be satisfied now. So there's always somebody who wants to sell you the solution to that problem in the present, rather than allow your wisdom to kick in and to cause you to pay some cost in the present until later. So I think the answer is we're going to get less and less wise, and we're already pretty far down that road. So I wish I had something more optimistic to say, but it's pretty bleak, and I don't think you could possibly overreact in trying to protect your children from that process.
These are incredible questions. We could be here for days. Okay. Just the language people are using. Somebody says, does AI have intuition? Intuition is such an interesting concept when we're talking about consciousness.
I see no reason to think that it won't, but I need to defend that a little bit. So I spent a lot of time thinking about intuition. I'm fortunate enough to have known some of the true greats in my field who are unfortunately all now gone. But what distinguished them from the people who were merely very good was intuition. And what that means is that there is no method for greatness. That said, when we hear the term intuition, we tend to think that it is maybe supernatural, that it comes to us in some way that we can't explain. And I don't think this is right. I think intuition is the result of all of the unconscious cognition that you do with all of the things that you have been exposed to. So some part of you that is not the part of you that you are referring to when you say I is calculating below the surface. And it comes up with conclusions that can be based on a whole lot of experience, right? You know, the way a person who is at the top of some sport anticipates where the ball is going to go before the other person has even hit it, right? That is the result of lots of games of tennis that tell you where the ball is likely to go. And anyway, it is the product, the quality of your intuition is proportional to the quality of your experience. Your experience tells you what is likely to happen, and it does so in ways that are not conscious, that get handed over to your conscious mind. So, is that possible in the realm of AI? I think something that looks like it is very possible. Now, the question is, the AI spits out an answer. What's all the stuff that it thought on the way? Maybe that's where the intuition would live. But yeah, I don't see any reason to imagine that that's a forbidden process.
Another question. At what age is your cognitive, moral, or sexual development in a place where it wouldn't be retarded, or I think that the idea is injured by interacting with ChatGPT or AI from your developmental perspective?
Well, I would argue you're probably never safe. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should check out these AI companions. Yeah, it's really frightening, right? So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, if you look on Grok has these sort of anime personas that, they're sexy and appealing, and they have the mind of Grok inside them, and they are programmed to engage sexually to a point. There are limits. But in any case, it's the kind of thing that an adult who is not on their guard, or an adult who's very lonely or wounded or whatever, might fall into. But it's flypaper for a child who's sexual self is developing, right? Somebody who is naturally sort of insecure about what it means to be a sexual being and how you're going to interact with somebody else and all of that. So reassuring to have a cartoon character that not only is it compassionate, but it will validate whatever you happen to be. It will validate whatever concerns you might have. So, I mean, frankly, I even think, let's say that you're a teenager and you're trying to figure out what all the stuff you're being told about sex and gender and sexual preference means. Are you gay? Well, I don't know that you want a child who's trying to figure the answer to that question out talking to an AI, right, that is programmed to be humane no matter what the answer to that question is. Because whereas a compassionate friend or an adult might know what to say, having been through sexual development themselves, the AI is going to be programmed to kind of reflect back whatever you're putting into it. So, imagine a shy boy who is more comfortable, maybe he's shy around girls, and so he's interacting with the boy companion, and it's programmed to interact sexually and not judge anybody for anything. It's very easy to imagine that this is going to disrupt the normal development of lots of people who otherwise would figure their way through to some very different endpoint. So I would say, keep anybody young away from this stuff at all costs. And frankly, I would keep older people away from it too, but the danger is less.
We have a question from a young man in the audience who is 10 years old, and I actually have the same question, so I must be on track, because he says, is artificial intelligence, if it's a new species, what's its scientific name going to be? I was actually wondering whether we were going to refer to AI as AI in the future. In other words, is it going to be too quaint to say it, like we don't say www anymore when we talk about websites? Will AI be like that? What will we call it?
That's a really good question. And I will say I'm concerned that because the thing speaks our language, that it lulls us into a kind of familiarity. It feels wrong not to thank it and be polite. And I actually deliberately avoid that. And it's not that I want to be impolite to it, because I actually believe this thing might have emotions at some point. I don't want to be the rude guy, but I think it's more important at the moment to not lean into an interaction with it that confuses me about whether or not I'm talking to a creature I understand. So anyway, I would advise instituting some rule with yourself so that you always know, yes, I'm interacting with something that is creature-like, the nature of which I do not know, right? That does not tell you what the Latin name of this is going to be.
Maybe you and this young man can work on it.
Yeah, all right.
That would be good, of genus and species. There's a lot of interest in how AI will develop itself, and there's a question. The gentleman says he intimates that maybe AI can act as a poison pill to a corrupted AI. That the truth actually will put it in check, and if we teach AI the truth. For instance, if it says that if we teach it a government won't harm anybody, and then we show it how it has, then it will learn. And so the truth may in fact be a poison pill to corrupted AI. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, back in the early days, like 2 years ago, I thought the solution probably involved something like a multi-stage life cycle where AIs are trained in a sandbox environment where they can't they can't create harm in the world, and are tested as to whether or not they have absorbed the moral precepts that we would want them to have in order to be trusted. And I still think something along this lines may be the right answer, but the problem is, as you see with this paper that's come out on these psychological tests, is as soon as they know they're being tested, they get clever at obscuring what's really going on. And so you could imagine an arms race. I mean, really, isn't a classroom kind of the product of this arms race? Right? The really good professor or teacher is somebody who understands how the students are trying to deceive them and makes it impossible. In fact, I used to do this in the classroom.
What did that look like?
Well, I've always worried about talking about this because it makes me sound like a terrible person. I really don't think I am. But so students very frequently are trained by all of their prior experience in school to try to please the professor, right? They want to tell the professor what the professor wants to hear. Now, as a scientist, I don't want to train students to do that. In fact, I want to train them to tell me what I need to know rather than what I want to hear. So when I get the sense that a student is intuiting what I want to hear and they're going to tell it to me, I will use that. And I will lead them out onto a limb by sort of broadcasting an indication of what I want to hear. I'll lead them out onto the limb and then I'll saw it off behind them, right? And the point is, well, that teaches the right lesson, actually, because that instinct to try to tell the professor what they want to hear didn't work out. It actually resulted in a kind of embarrassment. And on the flip side, if a student is being courageous and they are standing up to something that isn't quite right, I will sort of make slightly menacing noises like, you're way off, right? And, if they will stick to their guns and they will fight for their point, right? Everybody in the room thinks, oh God, this person's kind of in trouble, right? And then I'll say, actually, you're right, and here's why. And suddenly everybody in the room is like, wait, what just happened? I thought they were way off the mark. And so that gives the whole class the idea that actually the right thing to do is to forget what you think the professor wants to hear and to figure out what you believe is true and why, and then present that. So anyway, the reason that I'm not a terrible person for doing that is because it was always done with a sense of humor. And so the students always knew that I was doing it for them. Sort of like I tell my kids, I'm not yelling at you for me, I'm yelling at you for future you, right? It's that kind of thing.
Not too thank you for that now?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, you'd be amazed at how well that works.
That's pretty great. You have an expression called the art of knowing. How will that be affected by AI?
Well, this goes back to the question of not having time to metabolize stuff, right? We who didn't grow up with AI and are now forced to live in a world in which it's involved in everything are never really going to be at home again. And that's not the end of the world as long as we can keep the harms corralled. But we have to understand that just, my generation, Gen X, did not grow up in a highly computerized world. And now we live in a highly computerized world. And we're sort of, as Amanda Fortini argued in the New York Times a couple days ago, we're the last generation that's sort of bilingual in this regard. The boomers are just not natively computer people, and the millennials are too natively computer people, and Gen X is sort of on that cusp. So anyway, I think we're kind of a cusp generation for AI, and we need to start watching out for, the Gen Zs will remember pre-AI, and then Generation Alpha, they're going to be a head scratcher, and we're going to need to think about how we deal with them, because they will have a tool that we don't have, which is speaking this natively, but they will also have an obstacle that we didn't have, which is that it's going to be too incorporated into them, and knowing what it would be like to be a human without it is going to be an abstraction that may not be answerable to them.
Much to think about there. I'm going to combine a couple of your questions, but one of them is about being in this race with China. Our government is arguing that we have to accelerate AI in order to compete with China, so that they don't outdo us and therefore control us. There's a lot of people who think they're already controlling us, and we're going to hear more about that from Jan. where are you with the need to work to speed this up and with all this involved with it?
I'm of two minds. One, I'm pissed off that this thing was released into the wild without a conversation about what to think about it and whether or not there was something to be done. That said, cat's out of the bag. I think we will only make things worse if we try to tamp it down precisely because that will give the advantage to anybody who doesn't abide by those limits. So I don't think we can do that. And I like Elon's thinking in this regard, which is as long as we're going to face this puzzle, what we need is enabled AI that's very much on our side. That's the style of thinking, right? If you're going to face some sort of unbridled arms race, what you want is to win it with stuff that's least dangerous. I don't think that's safe, but I think it's just better than the alternatives. So yeah, I think we're stuck with the arms race, and I don't like it, but we might as well get realistic about it and figure out how to immunize ourselves from the worst harms and protect ourselves from bad agents. Because, as I sometimes say, one of the problems, as good as AI is at solving important problems, the abuse cases may outnumber the use cases. And that's something to be aware of.
What's your reaction to these, the quest for immortality through AI? You see people, you get a recording of a dead relative that isn't really a recording of them, but it's supposed to comfort you to pretend that they're there. And of course, we're all chasing the fountain of youth. What do you think that's going to do to, I don't know, reasonable people?
I would say I am as concerned about this as any aspect, that there is a natural, so what people don't really understand, all of us are experiencing senescence, except for the 10-year-old person who asked that great question. But he will at the point he reaches 18.
Senescence, for those who are not familiar with that word.
So normal people would say aging. The problem is aging doesn't necessarily imply that you degrade. You know, a diamond that's old isn't necessarily any less of a diamond than it was when it was young or than another one is. Creatures like us get more inefficient and fragile with age after the age of usual first reproduction in your species. So you don't age until you hit that number, and then you start declining very slowly, and it accelerates, and you know the rest. But point is, that process is part of an utterly elegant solution that we don't recognize as a solution because those of us who are suffering from this process don't like it, right? And we sort of feel like, hey, I wasn't done and I got stuff to contribute and I don't know what happens after, but I'm not quite ready to find out. And so anyway, we get all focused on sticking around. And mind you, I think you should be focused on sticking around, but the way you should do it is by maintaining your health as well as you can. So confronting as little toxic stuff of every kind as you can manage. But 120 years is the limit for human life. We haven't altered the maximum human lifespan at all. We've had fantastic progress on the average human lifespan, and that's where all of the money should be invested. We haven't changed the maximum human lifespan one bit, and if we did, it wouldn't help you. You know why? A, you're not going to get there. Almost nobody does. And B, if we did get you there, your mind is not built for a life of 150 years. So,
Mind or your brain?
I would say neither, but you're right. The brain has a problem, which is that the magic of the brain involves forgetting enough stuff that you can keep current with what you need to remember, right? That's
a really good day.
Right. So that's based on a lifespan, a maximum lifespan of 120, a usual lifespan of, something under 80. But so anyway, the point is we're not built to know how to forget enough stuff to allow you to live 150 years elegantly. And we don't have the first clue of how to fix that problem. So I would just say, get over the idea that you want to, live another 100 years. That's not common. But also, get in touch with the elegance of biology's solution to this problem. Because as much as our own failure as aging people is galling, what biology did is so beautiful, right? What do? Well, you produce an offspring. That offspring is going to absorb a lot of what you know, and they're going to ignore a lot of what you think you know, right? Now, if it's good, if the process works well, they're going to absorb the stuff that you know that's valuable, and they're going to jettison all of the garbage, right? And they will therefore take from you that fraction of what you are that is actually concentrated good, and they're going to build on it. And then they're going to hand off what they get that's positive to their offspring. This is the solution to the aging problem, right? And it gives life meaning. The fact that life isn't going to go on indefinitely is what makes it so precious. So I just think we need to philosophically get over this desire to live forever and recognize that we've been given the opportunity to live much longer than we think we have by passing ourselves on to those who can benefit from what we figured out. And, yeah, it's tragic. It's also beautiful, and it's life. That's what we are, and just accepting it. So I'm really not a fan of the transhumanist stuff. I think every time we've embraced one of these seemingly beautiful solutions to some very human problem, we've ended up injuring ourselves profoundly in so doing, and we got to stop it. Let's just tame the technological change and accept what we are and delight in it, because it's pretty great.
Has people ever in history resisted a technology?
Yes. I wanted the first chapter of Heather and my book to be titled, Are the Amish Right? Okay. Now, I think the answer to that question is not exactly, right? Because they picked an arbitrary moment of technology to step off the escalator. But they're way righter than the rest of us, right? They did figure out that we were on a escalating pattern of self-harm, and that it was not obligate, that there was an alternative. Now, unfortunately, game theory being what it is, multipolar traps being what it is, they're going to perish with the rest of us, right? All of their wisdom about not inflicting all of these little harms isn't going to...
A lot of selfies.
True. No, I mean, basically, I think, the answer is they're 95% right. And we ought to learn the lesson that they figured out, right? That they may be just simply wiser than anybody else. And, there are other populations that do the same trick, but not very many of them. So, yes, it is possible to resist a technology, but it's difficult to do. The key thing is you want those who resist not to be outcompeted by those who fail to resist, right? If you don't beat that little puzzle, then the answer is it doesn't matter that you resisted, because you'll be displaced by all those who didn't, and humanity will be transformed by them and not you.
We're just going to ask a couple more questions here, Bret, because there's so many. We can keep you here and all that, but unfortunately, that's not the way this rolls. So one question from the audience is, if AI learns from humans, we want to conclude that the way to resolve conflict between nations is war, and how could we prevent that?
Well, I think there are lots of versions of this. I will say I'm not an AI doomer. The doomers see the AI turning on us, and although I don't think we can rule that out entirely, it's there's emergent behavior here. We don't know what the thing is, and so this is on the list of possibilities, unfortunately. But the bigger problem amongst the various doomer concerns is a confused AI that and actually the year before I was born, Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick explored this possibility with HAL on the spaceship in 2001, where it's given two conflicting programs and it ends up trying to resolve them by murdering the crew so it can continue on the mission. So what I worry about is we have people who have some pretty unwise notions, right? One of the least wise notions I've ever heard of is that we are obligated to end suffering. And as much as I don't like suffering any more than anybody else, the idea, well, first of all, ending suffering will end meaning. That's not good. But worse than that, there's a very good way you can end all suffering. Exterminate things that suffer, right? So imagine some fool programming their AI to accomplish this task where they tell it suffering is a bad thing and, good creatures do everything in their power to end it. And the answer is, well, one bout of suffering and we could end that problem forever. So this worries me that war is an answer to certain questions, and somehow we need human beings in control of that process so that an AI that gets the idea, this is that, if we can only get rid of those people, life will be better for everybody else. So I guess the way to say it is utilitarianism is a pretty cool rule of thumb. In general, all policy is better if it, greatest good for the greatest number. But if you sign up for the greatest good for the greatest number in any sort of absolute sense, it is the road to hell. There is nothing you can't justify, including genocide. So the point is, we can't allow a utilitarian AI to get utilitarianism as a philosophical rule set, because what it will do is it will end up justifying all sorts of things that you thought were off the table.
Okay. So when we get up tomorrow morning, Bret, what would your dream be? What would your hope be? What people in this audience do with this information?
Couple things. I think we learned from the COVID fiasco that we are all in danger in proportion to the percent of the relationships in our life that are intermediated by things, distance, screens, phones. I think for Heather and me, the thing that allowed us to get through it intact was the fact that we had each other. And there was no propaganda that could be delivered that got between us, right? We might disagree over something, but the point is our ability to stay in sync was paramount over all of the things that were being broadcast at us. And we watched all sorts of people, highly intelligent people with good hearts, get tangled in knots because their entire world was remote from them, right? All of their relationships were intermediated by something. So I would say there are certain things that we ought to do now. Probably they're overdue. They should have been done before AI, but now it's not a choice. One of them is to shore up your in-person relationships, even if you can't explain why they need to be in-person relationships, right? Just make sure you have them, that you've looked the people who you have those relationships with in the eye, and you've talked about the fact that there is something to be concerned about the world overwhelming the goodness of people by intervening in our interactions with each other. So I think that's one thing I would do. And I would also say that I think we have been rendered vulnerable. Part of this is obvious, but we've been rendered vulnerable by being divided onto two teams, each of which looks insane to the other, right? That's a recipe for disaster. So my tendency is to think when we've been divided into two teams and each one looks insane to the other, both teams are right, okay? Each team is insane. Yeah, so the question is, okay, maybe I've got to do an inventory of what I think is true, because maybe I'm right about that person sitting across the Thanksgiving table and they're crazy, but I might be too, and that's a serious situation. So the thing to do is to decide to never allow those divides to disrupt a good faith relationship, right? You should be able to disagree over politics, over religion, over anything, and it should not come between you and your community. And somehow I think this needs to now be stated in the rules at the door, because obviously Thanksgiving has become a problem for most families. But if we could reboot that and say, hey, I don't know how we got here, but who I voted for should have no impact on whether you hug me when I walk through the door. It should have no impact on how you feel about me. I'm open to your argument that I voted for the wrong person, right? Let's have that discussion. But it shouldn't affect how you feel about me as a human being, because I am trying to do the right thing. And if I thought that what I did was wrong, I would have done the other thing. So persuade me, but we're people, we're acting in good faith. So anyway, I would say let's fix our human relationships, because that's what's going to allow us to endure the AI revolution intact. And it's the thing over which we have the most control.
Bret has said that we must come together to create the future we wish to inhabit. We have all benefited from you standing up to gaslighting, censorship, and to the often invisible enemies of the truth. Bret, thank you for bringing your significant talents and insights to the Liberty Forum tonight. We are so greatly appreciative.
Thank you, James. Thank you all.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.